Have you noticed that politicians struggle to enact the things they run on? That regardless of who wins elections, lawmakers find they cannot pass whatever legislation they like. They find themselves bound by what is popular, or at least their sense of it. They can only enact things within a narrow set of ideas, and that range is called the Overton window. And on the Overton Window podcast, we look at issues around the country and talk to the people who change what is politically possible. Now, too many of our fellow citizens treat their political opponents as barriers to be overcome rather than neighbors to be persuaded. Alexandra Hudson wants us to better respect the dignity inherent in others, and she's got a new book, The Soul of Civility, where she shares the lessons learned from all around the world and across time on civility. Lexi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
What is civility to you?
Civility is the bare minimum of respect that we are owed and owe to others by virtue of our shared humanity. And civility, as I argue throughout the book, is distinct from mere politeness. We often hear people using them interchangeably, either saying we need more civility or less civility in our public life, less civility and politeness. But it's essential, I think, that we disambiguate these ideas. So civility is, or I'll start with politeness. Politeness is manners, it's etiquette, it's external, whereas civility is internal. It's a disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals who are worthy of a bare minimum of respect just by virtue of our shared humanity and common dignity as human beings. And that crucially, sometimes actually respecting others requires being impolite, engaging in robust debate, telling hard truths, maybe even protest sometimes as the situation calls for it. So civility and politeness, very different things, and we need to disambiguate them in order to better understand what are the modes of conduct we want more of and less of in our society today.
Now, you write that we have within ourselves a selfish side and a social side, and these sides are often in conflict. What is it about politics that appeals to our selfish side?
It's a great question. So part of my story is that I worked in federal government, and I saw the depth and darkness of our division and our divided moment. And I wanted to be more part of the solution, a greater part of the solution than how I felt in government. And so left and started working on this book and moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, as part of just my attempt to escape the toxicity and division in our world today and in government. And in fact, I took a job in Indiana state government when I first moved to Indiana, where my husband's from originally. And I realized that there were the same dynamics of division and toxicity that I had experienced in DC. And so part of my argument in this book is that this is a timeless problem, that there is, it's really easy to feel like our own moment is the most divided. But this is not an America problem, not a modernity problem. It's a timeless human problem. And that the human condition is the human condition. It doesn't matter what place we're in, what time, what era we're in, what vocation we're in. That yes, it's easy to point fingers at our politicians and our public leaders and blame bureaucrats. But the same dynamics are at play, in classrooms and in generic office context, in our city neighborhoods, that the human condition, the self-love and the social in our nature plays out in all of these spheres equally. So I'm very skeptical of painting any vocation with a broad brush in that way.
Oh, fair enough. But I do like that point that you made that, things feel different this time. And so therefore we need to throw common respect out the window. We have to play by different rules. It kind of reminds me of the scent or the thought, when you're tempted to fight fire with fire, remember that firefighters usually use water.
Exactly. It's a great point that, one argument I make in the book is that, we hear a lot of this high stakes mentality that, we have to be willing to take the gloves off and do whatever is necessary to get the other side. And yet, What we don't appreciate is that when we hurt others, we hurt ourselves too. When we are malicious and cruel and debase them, that we dehumanize them, but also ourselves. And I get this idea from Socrates, who also influenced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And one thing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said was that he was talking about segregation. He said segregation is wrong because it degrades human personality, human dignity, and that segregation, it doesn't just hurt the segregated. Of course, it does by giving them a false sense of inferiority, but it also hurts the segregator. It deforms their soul by giving them a false sense of superiority. And that's actually where the title of my book, The Soul of Civility, comes from, because just as incivility is mutually debasing, it's mutually harmful, civility, acts of grace, charity, and kindness is mutually ennobling. And we insufficiently appreciate that today. It's really easy to say, like, we have to be willing to do whatever it takes to get the other side, but we don't realize that when we, get the other side, when we own the libs, like, it's not costless. It hurts us too.
Yes. So, what will civility do to benefit the people who practice it?
I argue in the book that civility is both an inherent good and an instrumental good. So it's an inherent good because treating others with the respect that they are owed by virtue of their human dignity, that is good objectively, full stop, in and of itself. Seeing the imprint of the divine in the other and affirming that is just objectively a good thing to do. It's its own reward. However, I talk about in the book that civility is also an instrumental good. It can, as it has been, a tool of social progress in our world today. And I also borrow from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that his civility was central, as I define it, was central to his peaceful, nonviolent resistance movement that ended Jim Crow laws and segregation in America. He had this process called purification, where he would have people come in and they would, who wanted to be part of his movement, and he would cultivate the disposition of as I defined, civility. He would cultivate love and affection for fellow citizens. And that love and affection for fellow citizens, people who held views of white supremacy, bigoted views towards African Americans, that love for them informed their action. It informed and demanded the letter writing campaigns, the sit-ins, the protests that defined peaceful, nonviolent resistance. That love and respect said, I respect you enough to confront you with your inaccurate view of the world. You are inaccurately seeing and appreciating the dignity and common humanity of all human beings. And I'm going to show you through these actions that you're wrong. And I respect you enough. And then, but it also, civility takes certain action off the table. For example, action of like violence, dehumanizing action, destroying someone's property, ad hominem attacks. That civility demands action sometimes, but also takes certain action off the table. That it's all about personhood, all about human dignity and respecting the dignity of the human being.
So let me try and simplify what I'm hearing from you for some of the benefits that civility would offer. One, you should feel better about yourself, and people should like you more. As in, you should feel better about yourself because you're treating people well, and in general, people like to be treated well, and will do the same in return. There is some reciprocity there, but you should do it just because it's a good thing to do too. And I think there are some benefits that you can get from that. You spend a lot of the time in the book trying to valorize and glamorize people, like your grandmother, who treated other people well. Why should we give these people high esteem?
Well, I love history, and I think it's so important to learn from the strengths and the mistakes and failures and weaknesses of those that have come before us to help us lead better lives today. That's very much the ethos of Civic Renaissance, my newsletter and intellectual community dedicated to beauty, goodness, and truth, and reviving the wisdom of the past to help us lead better lives today. And I embody that idea in my book. That I celebrate my grandmother, for example. I have this concept that I unpack in the book called the mellifluous echo of the magnanimous soul. So Aristotle, in his philosophy, gives us this concept of the magnanimous soul, someone who is just so put together, so self-assured that they're self-forgetful. They walk out into the world and just can be fully focused, fully present with others. And that's the magnanimous soul. And my grandmother, she was someone like that, and someone for whom there was no such thing as a neutral human interaction. Every interaction with others was a supreme gift. It was a profound blessing that she just relished in. She's like, this is a moment in time I'll never get back. And she sought the good of everyone, every person that she encountered. And she perplexed a lot of people with her brightness and her joy and her zeal to get to know them. People were like, what's the ulterior motive here? But she blessed many, many more. And we hear a lot today in our world of stories of vicious cycles of generational trauma, one person's self-love, selfishness, reverberating across time and across place in order to, and causing harm, untold harm and suffering for those around them. But less often do we hear of stories of great men and women who, through their magnanimity, put into play virtuous cycles that and create with their lives mellifluous echoes that keep on giving. So this the mellifluous echo of the magnanimous soul, that it doesn't partake any particular superpower that we're born with. It's instead nurtured. It's cultivated. This desire to seek the good of those that we encounter in the everyday marketplaces of life, and that we can all be artisans of the common good in our everyday, and that every single exchange that we have with another person is a gift. We're encountering a being with the imprint of the divine, and my grandmother knew the value and beauty in that, and we can too.
By the way, is that her picture above you in your office?
No, it's not. It's not. This is a friend's office, not my own.
All right. It's just kind of curious. All right. So your book is filled with all of these lessons from people throughout history. Why do you think that is kind of an important piece of evidence that people should consider? Like, what all these previous people in the past had to say? Or at least, why do you think this legacy is important to people today?
I think history is this untold source of human wisdom that we are too often disconnected from. C.S. Lewis, he called it chronological snobbery. This idea that, we're getting better and better, and that we're better than the primitive, more savage past, and that we don't need those that have come before us in order to live lives better now, that there's nothing the past can teach us. And we just so handicap ourselves, we hamstring ourselves when we take that approach. I love the approach of Plutarch. Plutarch, he was a Roman citizen, but of Greek descent. And he put in dialogue the lives of famous Greeks and famous Romans to see what moral lessons can we live that can help us lead our own lives better. And so even though he was Roman, he didn't, praise every single Roman that he wrote a biography of. And even though he was of Greek descent, he didn't just praise the Greeks. Instead, he said, okay, where is virtue? Let's celebrate that. Where is vice? Let's condemn that, and let's derive these lessons and apply them to our own lives so we can live better now. And he understood the power of storytelling and of the explicitly moral approach to history. That's another thing about our current moment. We're very afraid of making moral objective claims, like especially in the study in academic disciplines of history today. They want to be objective. They want to, they want to weigh pros and cons, and they're afraid of making categorical statements of right or wrong. But we have to. We have to be willing to make statements of right or wrong in our own moment today, if we are going to flourish, if we're going to survive as a species and thrive in our own moment now.
Wait, now how much of the classics have you read?
Certainly not all of them. I'm very much a student of the classics. I'm no expert. In fact, I didn't have a classical education. I'm kind of an autodidact. I've just enjoyed learning about the classics and great books throughout my life. In formal schooling, I focused on the Renaissance. I love modern European history. I was a history major. And so I kind of got a view of the classics through the lens of the Renaissance. And then since I've been out of school, I've really enjoyed reading these own texts and learning about these own thinkers and this history on my own after school. I just kind of foreshadow this as my next book idea on autodidactism, why we don't need to be in a classroom or go to school to get an education or lead a robust life of the mind.
Yeah, that was actually something that when I came into college, I wanted to learn something professional, because I figured it's look, you can get a classical liberal education just by reading a whole bunch of books and talking with a couple of people. You don't need to pay $20,000 a year for that. I don't know if I'm accurate about that, but I did wind up reading a lot of things outside of the curriculum. Of course, my favorite book being From Dawn to Decadence by Jacques Barzun.
I don't know that book. Tell me about it.
500 years of Western cultural history. I mean, you'll learn, it's so dense. There's so much on every page. Just to begin with, the modern era begins characteristically with a revolution. And he's talking about the Protestant Reformation at this point. There's just so much. You learn so much. It feels like you're pondering over 800 pages of forgotten lore. Very much recommended. Yes. And Jacques Barzun himself is an interesting character, in parts through some of his friendship with Lionel Trilling and kind of some of the discussion groups that he had. Longtime Columbia professor. There's all sorts of neat things about Jacques Barzun. You should check him out.
How do you spell Jacques?
Jacques, as in Jacqueus.
Got it.
I think I got his book behind me too, somewhere.
Very nice.
Yeah, there. But let's kind of talk about the Overton window, because I think right now, we have a political world where it's just filled with people who are just trying to overcome the opposition, be mean. And I think civility would change some of that. So me and my colleagues have championed a lot of policies that ought to have broad appeal that goes beyond partisan politics. And we do participate with cross-ideological coalitions to support these things. So we're talking about eliminating civil asset forfeiture, putting public benefit standards into occupational licensing rules. And we've covered a lot of these issues in the past on this podcast. But one of the reasons why I think that our efforts have been stymied is because lawmakers don't see a lot of electoral benefits in cross-ideological cooperation. So give me some hope. Do you think civility will unlock some of these important but neglected changes?
Well, it's an interesting question about the Overton window, because the Overton window, what is permissible in public discourse and public life, that is not governed by law. That's governed by mores. It's governed by social norms. It's governed by, there's no, Congress doesn't debate the Overton window in, with the budget discussion, it's cultural, it's grassroots, it's bottom up. And that's up to us to decide, what are we going to tolerate and what are we not going to stand for as a society. There is a role for concertedly changing social norms in society. I also love Dr. King here. He says, how do you tell a just law from an unjust law? Well, a just law is one that squares with the moral law. He would say, affirms human dignity and uplifts human personality. An unjust law does not square with the moral law and degrades human personality and human dignity. For example, laws that say some humans are of more value, more equal than others. And the same goes for social norms. Like we need to critically evaluate our own rituals, our own practices, what we're permitting and being intolerant of in our society, in our public discourse and public life, and say, do these norms square with our values as Americans of individual liberty, personhood, equality under the law, these traditional democratic virtues of tolerance? Or do they, and if they don't, then we need to discard them. We need to be willing to dismiss them. For example, norms that say only certain people can use this bathroom and this water fountain, that norms that refute the dignity and equality of persons. We have to be willing to call out norms and discard norms that don't square with our values as Americans. And as people who are fundamentally pro-human in nature, that we all should want to celebrate and affirm the dignity and equality of all persons.
So there is one norm, and I think I've mentioned this before, that I would like to see changed. And that is, again, like when we are talking about contentious political matters, that we approach the issue with the attempt to persuade. If you listen to the national political debate, it is a lot about how our opposition must be overcome. And I just don't feel like that is very much respectful of each other's dignity. And there are really good alternatives. Persuasion matters. Persuasion is still politically powerful in a world of divisive partisan politics. And so it seems underappreciated. But I think for that to really matter, you have to win. As in, civility has to re-enter the public debate as something that is admirable and venerable to practice as we discuss contentious political matters.
I think today we are very quick to blame, and we woefully underappreciate the power we each have to be part of the solution in our everyday. When I left a very divided government in Washington, D.C. and moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, where my husband's from originally, a woman came up to me after church one day. We didn't have any friends there, and one of my first friends was a woman named Joanna. She came up to me after church one day and said, "Hi, I'm Joanna. Would you like to porch with us sometime?" And I had never heard the word porch used as a verb before. But curious, we went to her home that day, and I realized that Joanna is staging a quiet porching revolution from her great big front veranda. She had curated people across politics, race, class, geography in town to inhabit a shared space, to feel seen and known and loved, absent of labels and kind of these superficial differences. And that was revolutionary. That will heal our broken world. Joanna is saying, with how she's living her life, I am going to refocus on what I can control. I cannot focus on what's happening in Washington, what's happening across the world. But I can focus on myself, and I'm gonna choose to focus on making my community better, my family stronger and brighter. And that's what she's doing, and that will change our world. The same applies to your question about how we use tools in our public discourse. How do we, engage with others virtually? How do we?
So
I have this idea.
Some efforts around
called cultivating or
try to reinvigorate. Oh, sorry, we were breaking up for a second.
Sorry, I have this idea in my book called "Cultivating Our Digital Garden." In our online life, how we can't focus on how others are using social media and these new tools that can sow harm and division in our world, but we can control how we use them, and we can use them to create brightness and beauty in our world. So I've done that with Civic Renaissance, my newsletter an intellectual community dedicated to beauty, goodness, truth, and reviving the wisdom of the past to help us lead better lives. It's a community of 50,000 people, and I invite anyone listening to join over at civic-renaissance.com. And it is an opportunity, it's my opportunity to embody the change I want to see in the world. I can't control what other people are doing on their platforms, on their Substacks, on their newsletters, but I can control mine. And I hope to, by embodying these things, I can both attract other people that care about these values and maybe even make a few converts along the way as well to loving wisdom and beauty and the wisdom of the past.
So I think that's interesting because I see a lot of attempts in the public debate right now to try to, bring civility back. And I'm perpetually frustrated with them. Like one of the most frequent ones I see is like, all right, let's exchange news sources and for a month and then talk about it. And it's like, I just don't feel like reading different news sources that say the other side is worthy of overcoming is a good way to increase civility. Same thing with kind of some discussion groups where it's just like, look, we got to have some shared values, some shared understandings, some places where we can offer each other mutual respect before we get into the contentious things. And so
that's exactly right. That's one thing I learned from Joanna's front porch, that too often when we encounter difference, we want to just go right to the difference and hash it out. And again, we make these mental shortcuts about people, like because of their skin color, because of one thing about them, we think we know everything there is to know about them, who they voted for or what their view on one issue or where they live. Like there's a political valence, a political dimension to virtually everything today. And, but that's what was beautiful about Joanna's front porch, that people had the opportunity to get to know one another just as humans first, as human beings first. And to sow those seeds of trust and friendship that might later allow for really important conversations across difference later. But today, we're only doing the hard conversations all the time. And we're undermining our public discourse and our democracy by not having that basic trust and affection first.
All right, let's say you've won. Civility is now in vogue. We treat each other with respect and dignity. How different is the world?
Well, that will never happen, unfortunately. This is a timeless human problem. It's not going away. No politician, no policy, no one technology has caused our challenge with civility right now. And no one public leader, no policy, no book is going to solve it either. If that were to happen, we could imagine an unprecedented moment of human flourishing, of vibrant outpouring of human potential, creative human potential, where we're just in total harmony and unity and joy together, like that. And we get glimpses of that right now, where we have moments where we feel seen and known and loved, and we have moments where we are able to have constructive dialogue across deep difference, and we have moments of pure joy with others, and we're like, okay, this thing called life together is hard, but it's worth it. This is the highest and best life. And the problem is that when we insufficiently cultivate those moments or pay attention to them when they're present, that the difficulty of life together seems to define our lives. And we become more and more tempted to just give up on it altogether, because life together is hard. It's grating. It's annoying. People are selfish and thoughtless and bothersome. And I mean, it's also very vulnerable for me to have written a book on this topic as well, because I fall short of my own ideals every day. And I hope that doesn't undermine my ideals. It's just my attempt to, I am all the more encouraged to double down and try again the next day. But that is the problem of our world today. We see people falling short, we condemn them, we blame them, we want to tear it all down, tear down the ideals, throw the baby out with the bathwater. But instead of saying, we're all going to fall short countless times each day, and that re-upping our commitment to this joint project of living well together, that's what our civilization, our democracy, our society, it depends on that.
Lexi, I hope your work makes it easier for us to shift the Overton window.
Thanks for having me, James.